Imagine being in your house doing chores. You're doing dishes, you hear something outside, it's a gunshot. You kind of look over, you take notice, you note that you heard the gunshot, but what do you think? I mean, unless you live in a huge big city where you hear gunshots and it's usually gangs or some kind of violent type crime that you would expect hearing a gunshot meant something bad happened. Say if you just live out in the country or you just like on the outskirts of town. If you hear a gunshot, you think maybe someone's trying to scare away an animal, maybe even target practicing or something like that. It's usually not the first thing that comes to your mind is that someone was just shot and killed, because that doesn't happen every day. So you're thinking, taking note of hearing the shot, and you kind of just go on with your day. I mean, me and my daughter, when we hear gunshots outside, we don't think anything of it, and we have a joke. We're like, oh, it's another family dispute got settled. Obviously, if we read in the paper that someone got shot and killed, we would feel like absolute crap knowing that we heard the gunshot that killed someone. So that would be terrible. But it's just, we don't live in a place where murders happen all the time. We don't think anything of it like that. Like, we usually think that it's just, target practice or somebody shooing off an animal or something like that, and we really don't think much of it. So imagine being in a place like that where you hear this gunshot and you don't really think much of it, and then you just kind of go on about your day. A few hours later, you get a knock at your door, and it's 2 police officers. Then what do you think? What is the first thing that would happen if you had police officers come to your door and you're the only one home? So your loved ones, your kids, your husband, wife, whoever is out in the world, and police officers show up at your door. Immediately your heart sinks, because you know that it's likely something bad happened. Either they were in an accident, or they got arrested, or worst case scenario, they're coming to notify you that your loved one is no longer living. Now imagine that the police came to your door and the notification was for your child. Your amazing child who has their whole life ahead of them, and if you're a parent, you, I'm sure, have contemplated how it would feel. You've cried watching movies when the person's child dies. You cry with them, even though it's not real, just at the thought, because you know that it would rip your heart straight out. So having officers come to your house a few hours after you hear these gunshots, being in a place that nothing bad usually happens and you don't really think anything of it, and then having police come to your door and tell you that those very shots that you heard that you didn't initially think much of went into your child. In Klamath, California, another small town in Delnorte County, about 20 minutes south of Crescentcity, California, on Highway 101, nestled in the redwood trees, is the small town that has a population of less than 1,000 people. So Klamath is very small but beautiful. It's home to the tourist attraction Trees of Mystery. Trees of Mystery is where the giant statues of Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox reside, or one of the places, should I say. Paul and his ox Babe are both old-time folklore lumberjack heroes known for their large stature and superhuman strength. Along with statues of the giant folklore heroes, there are trails through the redwoods. They also have redwood forest sky trails, a gift shop that contains souvenirs, along with a private collection of indigenous arts, crafts, and tools. The artifacts of the indigenous and many of the souvenirs are from the local native Yurok tribe, whose reservation is also in Klamath. For those who don't know, a native reservation is an area of land reserved for the indigenous tribes under a treaty made with the U.S. government that federally recognizes certain areas of land all over the U.S. as permanent tribal homelands, where the United States government holds the title to the land on behalf of the tribe. Now, this is obviously the definition posted on the government website, because the reality is the reservations were created after the genocide of the indigenous people took place when settlers from other countries began to arrive in what is now known as the United States, and they decided they wanted these lands for themselves and were willing to take them by force. After years of slaughter and being forced into concentration camps where the natives were starved, worked literally to death, and in many cases women raped and their children sold into slavery, the natives were willing to sign this treaty not because they really agreed or wanted to, but because they wanted to save the very few that remained of their entire race. To get the natives to agree, they were told that they would be sovereign, so self-governing, the bounties and various laws calling for the extermination of the indigenous would cease, and they believed this to be the best option to assure the survival of the indigenous who remained. But this would end up not yielding the results they were hoping for. Where the natives did have a designated place to live in peace, they couldn't participate in the society of the settlers who were taking over. So they couldn't buy or trade outside of the reservations, and the settlers' hatred for the natives never stopped. Even with this peace treaty in place, the settlers could still do anything they wanted to the indigenous people and get away with it, and they could also blame anything on them and be believed with no questions asked. Almost 200 years later, the indigenous are technically allowed in society, but they were exiled for so long and not given the same opportunities for betterment that they still are outcasts in the world. Reservation life in current times still reflects the decades of oppression, leaving a higher than average poverty level and all that comes along with that. Native women have the highest numbers of sexual assaults and sexual abuse, putting 1 in 3 Native women being a victim of a sexual crime at some point in their life, and 84% of Native women have been victim to some form of violence at the hands of non-natives. 80% of Native men are reported to have been victimized in some way also. With all the assaults, lack of health care, mental health care, underreporting of crimes, or crimes being reported and not investigated or dismissed, it's no surprise that the suicide rates on reservations are so much higher than the average in the United States. So much so that the Yurok tribe had declared a state of emergency over the abnormally large number of suicide deaths that occurred in 2016. Even with emergency declarations over suicide, extremely high assault ratings, and the well-known trafficking issues, nothing ever seems to change. This leaves reservation life in a perpetual cycle, with natives having no choice but to believe that their lives don't matter to the outsiders, and it appears that they are not wrong. In order to keep outside help minimal while still keeping an eye on their community, some tribes have what are known as tribal police, who are generally members of the tribe who patrol and enforce tribal laws on the reservation. It's believed they will also be more caring about what happens to their own and will have more encouragement to solve crimes that happen on their land. Tribal police are, however, limited. They're not equipped to deal with large-scale crimes and investigations, nor are they allowed to. When a severe crime such as a murder takes place, in order to get the case solved, they will utilize the assistance of outside agencies such as the Sheriff's Department, which does put the fate of the case back into the hands of the outsiders who have a reputation for sweeping native crimes under the rug and turning a blind eye to things that occur not only on tribal land but to indigenous people in general. When a crime takes place on reservation, the land is technically federal land, making any crime there a federal crime and the responsibility of federal agencies. Federal crimes in general are taken more seriously and punished more severely. Or are they? On May 1st of 2015, on the Yurok Reservation in Klamath, California, the residents heard 2 shots fired, and for one family, life as they knew it would change forever. Unfortunately, like so many other cases, this would become another cold case. Despite the mountains of evidence, various witnesses, and even the district attorney himself saying that this was an open and shut case. Almost 8 years later, this case remains open pending new evidence. But the difference in this case and others is most cold cases go cold for lack of evidence. This one had an enormous amount of evidence, and they even had a suspect in custody just 4 days later, and the headlines of the local newspaper would read, "Teenager being tried as adult in Klamath murder case." Even though they had this suspect in custody being charged in less than a week's time, this case would never see the inside of a courtroom, and in January the following year, the suspect would be released and the charges would be dismissed, citing lack of evidence as the reason. This reasoning actually made the least amount of sense. There was a ton of evidence and just nothing being done. In the area where the shooting occurred, there were various surveillance cameras, and there were also a ton of witnesses. There was so much evidence that the DA himself said it was an open and shut case, a slam dunk. But then months later, he dismissed the charges against the individual that they had in custody for lack of evidence. The suspect was released from custody in January of 2016. So only 8 months later, this case had gone from overwhelming evidence, open and shut, to lack of evidence and you're free to go. After years of protesting and constantly reminding the county and its representatives that this case needs to be solved, the district attorney made a disturbing comment to the victim's mother by saying she's better off handling it herself if she ever wants justice. This is a case where all the people in the justice system have dropped the ball, and all this has done is leave a child dead and his killer free. Dante was born on Valentine's Day, February 14th in 2002, and in 2015 he had just turned 13 and was a young innocent just beginning life. For no apparent reason, on the 100 block of Klamath Avenue in Klamath, California, on Friday, May 1st of 2015, 16-year-old Nathan Felice shot Dante in the head at point-blank range, damaging his brainstem. Various agencies responded, including the Delnorte ambulance, who stabilized him on the scene and then transported him to the hospital 20 minutes away in Crescent City. From there, he would be life-flighted to a better-equipped hospital in Oakland, California, where Dante would continue to fight for his life, eventually succumbing to his injuries 2 days later. On the following Monday, the county sheriff would make a statement. "We have a young man here that was shot and has died as a result of those injuries. We are going to pool all of our resources and exhaust ourselves to make sure we are accurate in the pursuit of this case." That is a direct quote from the county sheriff at the time. And the last part of his statement about accuracy may seem kind of unnecessary, but when you dive deeper into their track record, it makes sense why he would feel that it was necessary to word it this way. On May 5th, the headlines would read they had their suspect in custody, charged with murder, and being tried as an adult. But despite the quick capture and promises of justice, 8 months later, Dante's killer would walk free, and his case to this day still remains cold. With Nathan being released, he was able to go on to become a career criminal who continues to hurt people. He was charged earlier this year for assaulting his child's mother in front of the child, then kidnapping the baby, eventually being taken into custody in January of 2022. This is not the only crime that he's committed since the dismissal in 2016 either. It seems he is constantly in trouble with the law and always escaping the consequences. In 2021, he evaded police during an attempted traffic stop. He took police on a wild chase at speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, passing cars on the shoulder of the road, driving into oncoming traffic, even hitting a tree, then continuing on until the car became disabled. Turning the car chase into a foot pursuit, Felice then ran onto a property where he jumped into a small boat on a large pond and paddled out to the center of it. Felice fell out of the boat once but was able to climb back in, resulting in a 2-hour negotiation that ended with the boat sinking and him being forced to swim to shore. He was then identified and found to have 2 felony warrants for manufacturing and possession of assault weapons. He was no stranger to law enforcement before he shot Dante either. He was in and out of the juvenile detention center and had known gang affiliation. So it really was no surprise that he was the one responsible for Dante's murder, and there was never any doubt, even at the young age of 16, that he was capable of committing such an awful crime and taking an innocent young life. The only surprise here was that Dante actually considered Nathan Felice a friend. Being close in age and living together on the reservation with a very small population, it makes sense that they would know each other and be friends of sorts. Maybe not best friends, but, kind of passing friends, acquaintances more so. Now, even though it's a small town and the 2 teens were friendly, Dante was the complete opposite of Nathan. Though the vast majority of the community outside of the reservation and those close to Dante would not know this, as the DA allowed the local paper to run a smear campaign painting Dante as a druggie and this whole incident as a drug deal gone wrong, but this was the furthest thing from the truth. Dante was very involved with his native heritage. He loved the outdoors, fishing on the river, riding bikes, and just being a kid. The many who knew him would describe him as sweet and innocent. On the Justice for Dante Facebook group, it stated that after Dante was point blank shot in the head by Nathan Felice for reasons still unknown, Felice attempted to dispose of Dante while he was still alive and fighting for his life. After the shooting, many agencies responded, including the Delnorte County Sheriffs, the Highway Patrol, Yurok Tribal Police, and a variety of emergency personnel. The tribal police, however, did not respond until the other agencies had also responded, despite having heard the shots that ended Dante's life and choosing not to investigate, later on telling his mother, "If we investigated every gunshot in Klamath, that's all we'd be doing." So their lack of concern with hearing gunshots in a residential area in a town allowed Felice time to try to dispose of the still alive 13-year-old boy, very possibly furthering the damage to his brainstem. Even with a lack of concern in certain areas, the statement that the sheriff had made still gave the family hope and encouragement that justice would be served and that the system actually did care. The quick capture and charging of Nathan Felice as an adult instead of a juvenile furthered the family's belief that their loved one would not be failed like so many others. The importance of Nathan being charged as an adult instead of a juvenile would mean he would serve a longer, more appropriate sentence for such a heinous, senseless crime. A juvenile sentence would have been equivalent to a slap on the hand and a slap in the face for Dante's family, but they were pursuing Nathan being charged as an adult, which meant a longer sentence and justice being served. But this played out much differently than expected, and the promise of swift, righteous justice faded as this open and shut case with plenty of witnesses and overwhelming evidence would be dismissed. The DA even went out of his way to make a comment on a Facebook post that was expressing concern and annoyance for this case's outcome to point the blame towards the sheriff, stating, quote, "If you have questions or criticisms about how the investigations have been run, you should direct them to the sheriff. I can only prosecute a case that is properly investigated," end quote. Now, the DA's statement is not completely untrue, as according to witnesses, the crime scene was not handled properly, and on more than one occasion in the past, the sheriff's office has been known to mishandle evidence. The DA office, however, has a less than stellar history and reputation of their own. In the last 11 years, the Delnorte County's District Attorney's Office has seen its share of internal drama between the Assistant District Attorney and the District Attorney at the time along with other constitutional mishaps, including the DA speaking to a criminal defendant without their attorney present, not disclosing the conversation, then lying about it, and eventually that DA was disbarred. The next DA to take office, which is the one who was set to prosecute Dante's killer, suddenly resigned in 2017, stating issues with his pay as the reason, yet only gave a few hours' notice. So, a lot of questionable things occurring in the DA's office, all while they're pointing the finger at the sheriff. Given all the obvious misconduct and the odd statement made to Dante's mother that if she wants justice, she should take care of it herself, the family decided to create a petition pleading with the FBI to take over Dante's case, which should have actually been in their care from the beginning, as it's a crime that occurred on federal land. After trying to appeal to the better nature of the FBI and persuade them to take the case over so Dante could get the justice that he deserves, and also stop a violent career criminal, the petition would not generate the results everyone had hoped for, and to this day, Dante's case still remains untried and is not actively being investigated by the FBI or any other agency. A professor at Humboldt State University in Eureka, California, suggested the reason for the FBI not initially investigating the case or taking it over is that the feds have a bad attitude towards reservation crimes. They basically see it as not worthwhile and a waste of time. That's a direct quote from him. Now, this is just the opinion of one person, but a family shouldn't have to beg an agency to take over a case when it involves the murder of a child within their jurisdiction just to be denied. I mean, that didn't happen. They never took it over, so the family is begging for help to see this case get solved and have justice for this child, and they just decided it wasn't worth their time. With every single agency, one after the other, dropping the ball on this case, and the FBI not stepping in, it seems that this case may remain cold. One Facebook user commented on a post made in the Justice for Dante Facebook group that the only thing that can be done now is to vote the DA and sheriff out of office and then try again. At this point in time, both the DA and sheriff that handled this case back in 2015 have resigned. One would think the new sheriff and DA would have plenty to review, witnesses that were disqualified to be reevaluated without prejudice, or maybe new witnesses will come forward now that some time has passed. Unfortunately, cold cases do not have any type of annual review. I've seen cold cases in this very county go unsolved and unpunished for almost 30 years. This innocent child who barely had a chance to live was violently and senselessly murdered. He needs justice, he deserves justice, and his family deserves closure, and Nathan Felice needs to be stopped. On the screen is a reminder as of today how long Dante's family has had to live without him and how long this case has gone unpunished. He deserves justice, his family deserves the closure, and knowing that the system didn't completely fail him, which it has, but there's still an opportunity for redemption. If this happens to pull at your heartstrings and you feel compelled to do so, please join the Justice for Dante Facebook group, where you can receive updates on the case and hopefully one day be able to see that justice was served on it. No mother should ever have to bury their child, and on indigenous communities, this happens daily. Native people are kidnapped, murdered, trafficked, and the result is the same as in this case. Nothing happens, nothing is being done, and nobody seems to care. So this is something that needs to change, and you do not have to be indigenous to help make that change. Spreading awareness is as simple as sharing the cause, sharing information, being aware that it's happening, and trying to do everything you can to put a stop to it. And that's going to do it for this story. If you want to follow on other social media platforms, it's misteatime and the Untold Mysteries on Facebook, or MIS_TEA_TIME on Instagram and TikTok. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications so you never miss a future episode. Have a great weekend.